All right, I believe we are live. Welcome everyone to a very special hangout. We have a guest joining us, but before we get to that, let me just tell you who else is joining us so far. We have Daniel Wilcox.
Hi there.
And Chris Hangartner for as long as his mic holds out.
Yeah, and so anyway, I told her to fuck her right in the pussy and... Oh, we're live? Oh.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh.
Don't be getting people to flag my channel here.
I know, that was just a joke.
And we have a special guest today instead of the Libertarian Love Fest where we all diss on government and talk about the Civil War for some strange reason. We actually have in our midst a real-life anarcho-communist. So why don't you come to the mic and introduce yourself there?
Hello, they call me Ancom. Well, that's my username.
The most hated anarcho-communist on YouTube, if I recall.
Really?
Yeah, even his own kind doesn't like him, apparently.
That's true.
And to be clear, you're not the Antifa, Black Bloc, destroy Starbucks in a trash can type of Ancom, right?
Oh yeah, like I made strong anti-arguments against Black Blocs, you know.
So, I mean, I thought this would be great. Daniel kind of hooked us up with, and to actually just come here and to see if we can have a conversation, something other than the libertarian echo chamber we usually have. Yeah. So, why don't...
Yeah, and it's good. And I was about to say, and we will finally be able to get a communist that won't just rage quit and call us all fascists like they usually do.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, they don't even
actually do that.
The funny thing is that 90% of them don't even know what a fascist is. Fun fact: even George Orwell, he refused to call anyone he disliked fascist because he said in a quote that fascism got so thrown around that it's like, you know what, it's got no purpose anymore because everyone's calling each other a fascist. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, there'll probably be one on that in the next set of quickies that I'm working on now. So
yeah.
So, Ancom, why don't you come and take the mic, and we'll let you have your say, and you tell us what anarcho-communism is all about and why it's your thing.
Well, it's actually an interesting story of how I got into anarcho-communism. I mean, I think I was already destined to fall along this path all along because I've always been sympathetic to left-wing views and I've always been sympathetic to libertarian views. However, when I was younger, I believed in the false dichotomy between the authoritarian left and the libertarian right. That's the one that everyone's told. You're either with the state or you're with the market. Later I found out there's a third dimension that not many people talk about, and I mainly learned about that through people like Noam Chomsky. I mean, I watched the videos on YouTube. I'm not much of a reader. I don't think reading actually helps all that much. And, you know, there's things I hate. There's a lot of things I hate, which is where people will quote books and say, I know everything because I read the book. And I'm like, no, you don't know everything because you are not actually putting this into your own philosophy. You're just reading stuff and saying, well, I know this now. Well, you're only going to remember 5% of that. I'm just saying.
Basically, how the libertarian left might cling dogmatically to Bakunin or Perdue, while the libertarian right would cling dogmatically to, say, Rothbard or Friedman.
Pretty much, that's basically what I was trying to say.
So what is this third idea in your estimation?
Well, I made a grid of political positions, and I made something called the means of production pyramid. And it's a triangle with 3 corners on it. At one corner, you've got absolute statism. On one corner, you've got absolute private control. And on the third corner, you've got absolute workers' control, aka socialism. So I think that's...
you see yourself in that third corner of the triangle with worker control?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to give you a magic wand. And you can wave that magic wand and turn the entire planet into exactly how you think things would work in an anarcho-communist paradise. So paint a picture of me of what that looks like.
Well, let's start off with getting rid of state, because fuck states. I think you agree.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, we still have a little bit of a libertarian circle jerk here.
Yes, I think you do. Make sure not to make a libertarian state over it, okay? Just saying. Anyway, I want to go further with this. So I'm actually all right with ANCAPs, and a lot of them aren't, right? I mean, there's one thing that capitalism, conflicts with me, and that is the infinite growth stuff. So the infinite growth is where capitalism seeks to grow and grow and grow and keep, exploiting the workers and growing off that. And it just keeps growing, it keeps destroying the world for profit, and the ones who make the most profit win. I think we agree with this, but the idea is right. If you are, let's say, you capitalists, if you stay in your own area and you don't bother me, I won't bother you. Live and let live. I'm an individualist. I just disagree with the idea of capitalism, and I disagree with the idea of statism. I prefer the idea of a gift economy, mutual aid style, that type of thing.
So, and I mean, I think this is really the nub of it, because if me and Daniel and Chris and Lord Hawkeye and Mr. Dapperton and that guy T and all that, if we got together and we started doing things our own way, and we were building businesses and hiring people and minting gold coins and exchanging them as money and doing everything the capitalist way, what do you think should happen to us?
I don't think anything should happen to you. What I do, though, I would, tell the people about my society. I would, in a way, with my society, compete with your anarcho-capitalist society and attempt to beat you in the realm of ideas and get people to come over to mine.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, this is what I keep saying, because either, you're going to say, well, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and force you to do things my way, in which case you've just created a state. I think you'll agree with that.
Yes.
If you're not, and if it's just, hey, we've got two different ways of doing things, well, in my estimation, that actually makes you an anarcho-capitalist, because capitalism isn't about saying, oh, okay, there's this one way of doing things. It's kind of the exact opposite. And I mean, if you did things the Ancom way, and I'm looking at that going, hey, that works pretty well, maybe I'll do that. As long as it's voluntary, it would still be a capital, because anarcho-capitalism, it's not about what I would do as an individual. It's about what I will tolerate others doing, which is everything that's not an initiation of force. So that's kind of how I see it.
I just see that as individualism. I mean, the way I see capitalism is radically different to you. I mean, I see capitalism as an economic system with three aspects to it. One, the private ownership of the means of production, so the means of production is in the hands of bosses and job creators. Two is the market economy, where things are bought and sold and traded. And three is where anyone who doesn't own means of production has to work for those who do. This is wage labour. And I think this is how you define capitalism. And I don't think capitalism and individualism can be put together for that reason. Those people who have to sell themselves to get a wage are essentially being forced to compete with each other in a collectivist environment, except it's never referred to as collectivism. It's a hierarchy, and hierarchies are collectivist. But people always call it individualist for some reason. I never understood that.
But I'm just kind of a little confused by this, because you said that you're going to allow us to do that if we want to own property and we want to own the means of production of our own factories.
He's going to allow it. He just doesn't. He's a little confused by it.
While I'm a non-interventionist, I don't think I wouldn't get involved in anything unless it was affecting me, which you aren't. You're not affecting me. I'm in my society, you're in your society, and whatever.
And we have a question in the chat room. Yes, I finally got it to where I can see the chat room. I'm not going to try to pronounce this guy's name, but he says, how do the workers control all the means of production? Is the society just filled of one-man businesses?
Well, in a way, if you want to define it that way, sure. I mean, I guess in a way you could say that a person working in their kitchen, in their house, cooking the food, in a way is a one-man business, or in a way. I guess you could sort of say that as they provide for the family. I don't know if you would say that is in a way a one-man business or not, but I could see how it could be classed as such.
I mean, what about the case like specialization. Like you've got one guy who's just really good at carpentry and he's going to build all the tables and chairs for everyone. How do you arrange that equitably?
Basically, if I may make an attempt at this, basically it's more that the workers within the factory will act less hierarchically necessarily and more through democratic means.
Yeah, more on a horizontal, flat organizational structure, I guess you could say that. I mean, the way I see it and the way I'm part of a group called Operation Anarchism, and the way it functions is we're all individual content creators. We produce our own content, and the group's there just to facilitate the gaining popularity by making a conglomerate of media. And that's what it is.
So is it essentially like all of the workers have a share in the corporation, and every time there's a corporate meeting to decide what to do, they all get a vote on it? Something like that?
They all get the same, yeah.
Okay. And we are getting complaints in the chat about your mic for some reason.
Yeah, you're dalking. You're kind of dalking.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how you fix that.
Nor do I. Better check my internet connection.
I don't think it's the connection. Maybe turn your cam off and see if you can get some more bandwidth.
All right, let's try that then.
Actually, I'm not sure I can actually see the chat. I can see you, me, all of us, but I can't see anyone else commenting.
Yeah, I had to pull it up in a separate window. It's kind of elaborate.
Oh, is that the YouTube link?
Yeah.
All right, does it sound okay now?
That's sounding a bit better, I think. I wasn't really hearing it that much, but.
It's just continue.
Is that the YouTube link? Sorry, I had
Yeah, what I had to do is I had to go to the YouTube link and open it up, and then it gives you the video and the chat next to it. I just went to the chat, and it was called something like Pop-Out Chat, and it popped out the chat in a separate window, and then I could close the YouTube window, and I've just got the chat window up.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see it right here.
Yeah,
I see it now.
Live chat.
Yeah, there's not an easy way to do it, sadly.
Wait, let's see. Emoji.
But Ancom, it doesn't really sound like we're disagreeing on a whole lot. I mean, you're doing something that, might be considered, like a co-op or something like that. And there's every room for that in capitalism. Capitalism doesn't have to be done any one particular way. In fact, the idea is people are going to try different ways of doing things, and we'll stick with the ones that work and discard the ones that don't. So,
yeah, that's always been my little beef with communism to a certain degree, is that most communists, I'm not saying all, but a lot of them tend to have this mentality that it has to be done this way, like with capitalism. Like when we try to explain it, it's like, no, it has to be like this hierarchy thing. And I'm like, no, capitalism does not exactly need to be a hierarchy. Basically it's just goods, ideas, and services are exchanged on a free market, and how you obtain those goods and services are up to people. You either form your own business or you become a worker and help another guy form his business,
Actually, this kind of boils down to two of me and Ancom, the two of me and Ancom's main theories. One is that a lot of our divergence in our schools of thought boiled down largely to semantics. We fundamentally use the same terms, but with completely different meanings. And another is, again, the reason a lot of people, again, the reason we've been hostile for a long time is largely due to psychological reactance.
And if you want to talk about psychological reactance, I actually talk about that in my video where I address the UC Berkeley riots.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, because whenever people do like the political compass and stuff like that, they always put anarcho-communism as the exact opposite of anarcho-capitalism. And if we're to accept what you're saying as being true anarcho-communism, I don't really see the difference.
Well, I'm an individualist.
Well, so am I.
Yes, the more individualistic you get, the more compatible. You see, I've always thought that the bottom half of the political compass was essentially like the very bottom of it, at the very least, was essentially all completely 100% compatible. But the further up you go in the compass, the more incompatible things become.
So it sounds like you think it should really be like an inverted pyramid with a point at the bottom and then spreading out the more status you get.
You know, you speak of that, I actually think it's completely the opposite. Because I see Hitler and Stalin are actually very similar.
They are.
No, this is less to do with similarity. This is less to do with similarity and more to do with compatibility.
Yeah, Hitler and Stalin were not compatible.
They were similar, but they were not compatible.
Those two forces could not exist in the same place.
We're in many ways we're in many ways disparate, but we're very compatible.
Yeah, we're actually that's actually a good way of putting it. I respect that.
And the chat...
let me get you to turn your camera off there, because your audio's getting warbly again, and I think it was coming through better when your camera was off.
I don't know if I should bring this up, but a lot of people in the chat are not liking what we're discussing right now. They're saying, how does like the workers' committee know how many chairs to make?
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. That's from Mark Efreet. How do the workers decide how many chairs to make in the carpentry factory? Do they vote on it? And I think what he's getting to is the economic calculation problem, which is how do they get the information in a capitalist system that's done through the price mechanism. And as I said at the end of How to Argue for Tariffs, prices are really a form of communication between buyers and sellers. And without that communication, how do you determine how many chairs to make versus how many tables to make or whatever?
Yeah, that's...
The thing is, communism produces a surplus. And with a surplus comes mutual aid. So they might produce too many tables and chairs, but doing so, it will allow them to cooperate with other societies who don't have enough chairs and tables.
But that's not really the question. Like if you decide like you're building too many chairs and there's like 20 chairs per table and people only need 6, and so everyone's got all these chairs sitting around but not enough tables. What signals are there to say, hey, we need to stop making so many chairs and start making more tables?
Well, I mean, you could just give some of them to other communities, and then you can...
But all the communities have to... There's just too many chairs.
Hey, we'll trade you our tables for your chairs.
Except there aren't that many tables. We need more tables. We got too many chairs. Economy-wide.
It's just a subset of mutual aid.
But how are we gonna say, hey, someone needs to make some more tables?
Well, we could go and tell them that we need more tables. I mean, go to the community meeting and say, yeah, we don't have enough tables. Can we produce some? Just get the suggestion and people might take it into account.
Hey, Ancom, here's one question. I asked this to...
Chris, you cut out.
But this that I've been at this long and dodge the question.
Chris, you're cutting out.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out.
Question or the question. Would an anarcho-communist society deal with scarcity? Because we all know that there's no such thing as an infinite supply of certain stuff. Human desires are infinite, but the resources to get them are finite.
Human desires are only infinite in capitalism because there is a desire produced by the propaganda campaign of the media and advertisers.
Wait,
to get people to buy stuff.
Is someone else hearing like a weird call?
Yeah, I'm hearing some kind of call music.
Petro in
Yeah, but I mean, desires being infinite, that's not because people are advertising. That's just how people are. People always want more than what they have right now. And I mean, we see that in every kind of society. I mean, it was even true back in hunter-gatherer societies. They were just a little less able to do it, but they were able to make axes and then spears and then bows and arrows and things like that. All of that was an expression of trying to get things advancing.
I mean, back in the hunter-gatherer society, you just try to get anything. But what you're doing here, and I understand why you're doing this, you're putting capitalism as the vacuum state of ideology. So,
well, it's not even capitalist ideology, it's basic economics. It's the foundational principles of all economics. Desires are infinite, resources are finite.
Well, desires can be infinite if there is a requirement for material goods, and people can be tricked into wanting more and more stuff without actually wanting it. They've got like
it's not even about that. I mean, like, people want a cure for cancer. That's not about a desire for material goods. That's about, hey, I see something that kind of sucks and I wish there were a way to fix it.
Well, agreed there. I mean, I agree. I think we should strive towards trying to cure cancer. And I think the best way to do that is through cooperating with each other.
Yeah, but I mean, once we get the cure for cancer, there'll be something else. It'll be Alzheimer's, or it'll be some other disease that's come around, or it'll be,
or it might even be an improvement to the cancer.
Or it might be space travel, or whatever.
But really nasty it gives me really nasty side effects. I wonder if we can develop an improved cure so it doesn't give us as many nasty side effects.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be something else.
Again, Ancom and me have talked about this, and I think what we came to was, in the absence of certain things like intellectual property, people, for whatever motive, would develop these things on their own in a way, So
I want to give an example of this. For example, if a cobbler finds a better way of making shoes or repairing shoes, instead of keeping this knowledge for himself and out-competing his opposition like what would probably happen under capitalism, instead what would happen is he would actively spread this with other cobblers and have all the cobblers in the region have this knowledge.
But I mean, that doesn't really go kind of the source that got us on this, which is like, how do we determine how many resources to put into making shoes better as opposed to curing cancer or doing space travel or whatever? How do we figure out how those resources should be allocated?
Basically, what Shane is talking about is market signals and market indicators.
Exactly, yeah.
If you're familiar with the concept.
Because the price mechanism does that, and that's been well established.
Yes, the price mechanism indeed does that, but even if capitalism's better at doing one thing, such as the price, knowing how much to produce, I mean, I'll give you this, it is well made to give an idea of this. But again, if we want to talk about efficiency under capitalism, it's also not very efficient to put a lawnmower in every house, for example. It's much more efficient, because the lawnmowers aren't being used very often, to just have one or two and share them between 20 houses or something.
But how do you make that determination? I mean, in a capitalist system, it will be determined by the price of a lawnmower. If lawnmowers are $10, then yeah, everyone's going to have a lawnmower. If lawnmowers are $2,000, fewer people are going to have it, and that's how you figure out how many people should have lawnmowers.
Well, the way I say it, that's not very efficient, because the lawnmower's just sitting unused in the shed for 99.9% of the time.
Of course, then it goes into disputes of who gets to use the lawnmower at the time.
I mean, it's much more efficient to have a sense of altruism grow in the community, where people grow trust with each other and don't have to rely on stealing to get by in society. I mean, the reason people steal is mainly because of economic inequality, and that's why people steal, because they have these desires which are produced by the marketing campaigns of advertisers, and they want to fulfill those desires.
But staying on the point about the lawnmowers, I mean, if your problem is lawnmowers sitting around idle, well, why is that necessarily a problem? If lawnmowers are cheap, then there aren't that many resources that went into the lawnmower, and so it's not so bad that it sits around. But if all of a sudden the resources that go into making lawnmowers, if they, somehow get more scarce, like the ability to sharpen blades or whatever, we're not able to do that as much, then the increased price of lawnmowers will mean that people will have an incentive to, I have a lawnmower that's not being used, I'm going to sell it or I'm going to rent it out. And then as it becomes more valuable, it will continue to be used more often.
It's like the distinction between, say, everyone having a car versus carpooling and use of transport. Yeah,
exactly, and that's what Uber is doing. I've got a car and it's sitting around idle, and I got some spare time, so I'll give some people some rides for money.
Which is all good under capitalism. Under capitalism, you have to gain money to gain more freedom, because the ones who have the most money essentially have the most freedom under capitalism.
Can I just say something?
Let's go to the next one from Caustic Cynic, because I'm getting behind in the chat. He's asking, what's stopping worker-owned businesses from succeeding now? Why isn't that happening? If that's a better way of doing things, then...
I would argue that it's largely the same things stopping a lot of competition from succeeding at the moment. Just barriers to entry. And we actually do have one successful example of a worker-managed company called the
Monsanto is in Spain.
Called the Mondragon Corporation in Spain.
Monsanto, not Mondragon, that's it.
There's also a grocery chain called Woodman's that's employee owned.
There's one in the UK, sort of. It's sort of a kind of a hybrid of a company and a cooperative called the Cooperative Group. Unfortunately, the reason why cooperatives are much rarer, I feel, is because under capitalism, the goal is profit, and profit allows companies to grow more and more. It's harder to combine profit when everyone gets a similar amount of working.
But how is it any different from what we have now, where you have stockholders and the stockholders getting it? If the only difference is the stockholders are also the workers, well, what's really the difference there?
I'm not too familiar with the idea of stocks. They always confused me.
It's just basically a share of ownership in the company. If we create a company right now and we divide it into 4 shares, and you get a share, I get a share, Chris gets a share, and Daniel gets a share, then we all have 25% of the company. And
okay. Well, I see with a cooperative, I actually understand why cooperatives fall short under the capitalist system. It's because all 4 of us have to agree to put a certain amount into the company or cooperative. I mean, it's much more easy for a business owner to put an amount of money into his business rather than rally together a bunch of workers in a cooperative to combine their pool and put it into the cooperative. So that's why businesses succeed better under capitalism than cooperatives do.
But I mean, you've already said that you'll allow us to do it that way in your ideal universe. So if that way works better, then why shouldn't we just set up our little capitalist system and do it?
Well, maybe it works better for you. And maybe it works better in an economic way of looking at things, but there's other ways of looking at things apart from the economics. I mean, we could look at it from how people's morale in the community is. And we can have a look and see how the bottom class of society is doing, the bottom of the hierarchy and the top of the hierarchy, compare them.
So you don't think morale plays a big role in a capitalist economy? I mean, if you've got a choice of where to work, you're going to want to work a place where you have better morale, and you might even be willing to give up a certain amount of pay or benefits to go to a place where you have greater autonomy or better working conditions or whatever.
Well, the thing is, under capitalism, if you don't own any capital, you have to work for a wage. So that isn't actually particularly voluntary. It's like being a slave and being able to be your slave owner in a way. That's the easiest way to say it.
But I mean, if I go back to the carpentry thing again, if I'm just making chairs,
hold on, couldn't you in theory say have the workers collectively pool funds to acquire capital?
well, in a way, I guess you could, but it's harder to, again, get multiple people together to do one thing than get one person to do that thing.
But I mean, it's like if I'm making chairs and I'm trying to sell chairs, and that's kind of difficult. But here's this guy, and he owns a business, and if I make chairs for him, he's just gonna pay me, and then I don't have to worry about, you know, advertising my chairs or seeing who gets my chairs or anything like that. If I don't end up with this big pile of chairs and figuring out how to get the chairs distributed to people, my boss is going to do it for me, and he's just going to pay me. How is that not better for me than trying to do it all myself?
Well, maybe it is better for you, but it won't be better for some other people. That's the point I want to make. That, you know, it's fine. You want to live in a capitalist society. That's great. I wouldn't bother you if you don't bother me. But the thing is, the way that capitalism works currently is you have to participate in it because there's no other way in the world apart from a few other places which are probably even worse, to say the least.
I think this is the part of my confusion. I really don't get how you mean you have to participate in it. I mean, you can go in the woods somewhere and just live like a hermit if you want.
There's people that do that.
No, let's not go into the hermit fallacy, please.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, it's just like anything else. If you're free to make your own decisions, then you're free to determine who else you're going to work with, if anyone, what you're going to participate in. And, you know, of course, it's going to be the case that if you want a better quality of life, you have to work with more people to do it. And I think the mutually beneficial aspect of the voluntary exchange is actually what allows that to happen.
Yeah, Shane, I believe you covered this in one of your quickies. You know, one fallacy that a lot of, you know, leftists and the economics love to do is they love to pull the whole worker star fallacy. But the truth is, that's going to happen no matter what system you adopt.
Yeah, it's always worker starve.
I mean,
hold on. I think Ancom generally agrees with us on the worker starve issue. He just thinks that work should maybe be organized differently. And, you know, if we can both do that independently, organize how we think would be the best way, then...
But that's actually anarcho-capitalism. Organize it however you want, and if you think that's going to work, and it'll either work, in which case, great, or it'll fail, in which case you were doing something wrong, and we need to figure out a different way to make better use of those resources.
Sounds like, again, we're going to get into semantics here.
Yes, it's going down to semantics.
Well, then let's go to another question then. In an anarcho-communist society, how do you solve free riders that just want to sit at home and not work? Does someone force them to work, or does someone stop them from using a public item?
I just want to quickly add my 2 cents here. That's actually a good question, because something like this did happen when America was first founded, because when America was first founded, it was kind of like an anarcho-communist society.
Well, in a way, that's what some of the Confederates were originally going for. I mean, the Confederacy was about decentralization versus the Unionists. The Union, which was more centralization with a stronger federal government. Of course, we all know who won that. Who won that war? It was
I think though the closest one are the ones, the anti-federalists. You know, when it was under the Articles of Confederation, the original Confederacy, you might say, and you know the Federalists under the Constitution were the ones who were trying to make the stronger central government.
In a way, you could see the network of anarchist societies as a sort of confederacy, where each one makes up its own, its own legislation, if you like, in a way.
And of
anyway,
course,
getting back to the question. So what do you do with the people who just want to sit around, take all these resources for themselves and not give anything back?
Well, I wouldn't do anything to them. I mean, that's their choice. If they want to do that, whatever. But here's what I'm going to say, all right? People don't just do it for the carrot on the stick, per se. And the carrot on the stick is usually a wage for your work. People work in their house. People clean their toilet. It's not a pleasant thing to do, but they clean their toilet because they want a better environment to live in. And I think if you extend a sense of community in a region, that you'll get more people to act like that, and eventually cooperate with one another to...
So it's more about cultivating a culture than enforcing a doctrine.
Yeah.
Well, then actually I have to go back to one of the original settlements, Plymouth Plantation. I don't know if you've read Governor Bradford's diaries on it or not, but that was the original idea, was trying to cultivate this. And he actually started out with kind of a best case scenario. Everyone was, very religious, very down with what he was going to do. And yet you had this problem of everyone just taking what they wanted, not contributing much, being lazy and things like that. And they were starving. And then Bradford said, okay, we're going to do it a little bit differently now. Everyone's going to have their own patch of land to farm, and then they can keep whatever they farm. And then if they want to give it to other people, they can, but they're not required to. And just making that one change with the private property rights took them from starving to having plenty to eat. And he even wrote about the change it made in people's attitudes, just how much more friendly they were to each other, how much more eager they were to go out and get things done. I mean, the difference was night and day.
I mean, what you're talking about there is you're talking about individualism versus collectivism. And I actually agree with the second version. That's just personal property. You're not actually employing anyone on your farm. That people are just taking care of themselves, growing their own vegetable gardens or whatever. And that's just pure individualism. And I support that.
Okay, so why would it be any different if, say, okay, I'm going to let my neighbor come and work on my farm, and in exchange, I'm going to give him some of the food? Is that fine?
Well, yeah, if you want to talk about that, right? So, if you both work on it and you both get an amount of food, then that's more of a cooperative, right?
Okay, so how is it different when money comes in? If I'm going to pay him, so many gold coins, and then he can use those gold coins to go and buy food or anything else that he needs, at what point does it start being exploitation?
When you're not actually putting in the labor on that farm, when you just got other people doing it for you.
But at what point does it become exploitation?
I already said that, didn't I?
Well, no, you haven't, because...
No, I mean, okay, if I offer, Ancom, if I give you access to my farm, right?
Okay.
You work on my farm, and in exchange... Okay, you work on my farm, and in exchange, I give you... Okay, actually, let's try the fishing net analogy, because that works a lot better. If we're... Okay, Shane, you can do the fishing net analogy, right?
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. The two guys are stranded on a desert island, and they're just kind of fishing for themselves. And they can each catch a fish a day, and that's kind of like barely eking out what they need. One guy decides to go hungry for the day, and instead of fishing that day, he builds a net. And so the next day, really, really hungry, he starts using his net. And it's not the greatest net in the world. He's not exactly a professional net maker, but he can now catch 3 fish a day instead of just 1. And so by taking that sacrifice to go hungry for the first day to make the net, he can now get more fish.
He can get 3 fish a day with the net. But he gets the worker. He gets the other guy.
Okay, yeah, that's the second part, is where the guy says, "Oh, hey, you've got this net and you're getting all this fish. How can I get in on this action?" And he says, "Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll let you use the net at a price of a fish a day." And the guy says, "Okay." And now he's using the net. Now he gets twice as many fish. The guy goes back to 1 fish a day, but guess what? He can build another net, and now he's got 4 fish a day.
Well, what you're saying there, I mean, you make it sound great, and okay, they both benefit. That's fair enough. But what you've got to remember is, we're looking at a vacuum example, and this is probably the whole idea of subjective value. That's probably what you believe in. You probably believe in the subjective theory of value.
Yes, that's
sure, because that's pretty obvious, I think.
Well, I've got a problem with the subjective theory of value, that it doesn't take into account external influences. For example, both parties benefit if one person's dying of thirst in the desert and the other person sells them a bottle of water for £1 million or dollars or whatever. Both parties benefit, but it's clear that the person who's selling the water is taking advantage of the situation.
Is he?
Yes.
I mean, what if he was selling water for the same price that Walmart does, and then all the people who don't need water come and buy up all the water, and then the one guy who needs it ends up being dehydrated because now he can't get the water.
Well, he can't get the water, he's going to die.
Yeah.
But it's clear that someone's going to try and take advantage of that and try and exploit him.
Well, exploiting, as you call it, was the situation that actually got him the water.
Well, it got him the water, but he's clearly in debt for a lot of money now.
Yeah, whereas the other way, he's dead.
Yeah, so either you pay up a lot of debt, you're going to be definitely to like bitch, or you fucking die.
Okay, so which way's better?
They're both terrible, aren't they?
Yeah, but they're not both equally terrible.
Or are they? I mean, you're not going to be able to pay. The guy's going to send tough guys to your house or whatever.
Basically, he sees the idea.
Do you want to die quickly, or do you want to have
this as a situation of putting someone in debt for the rest of their life in a similar situation to a state. Hello?
Yeah, I'm not really getting what you're saying. Are you saying that the guy with the water jacking up the price is a state?
I didn't say he was a state exactly. I said if he come across an opportunity for exploitation to get rich, and that's what he's going to do. I mean, we see this all the time with scammers. I mean, it's profitable to actually try.
We see at the time with what? I'm sorry, you're hard to understand again.
Scammers.
Oh, scammers. But I mean, what you're talking about isn't a scam. It's just a guy with a big price. And if water is even remotely easy to get, and you know, this one guy is saying, "Oh, well, I'll offer you $10 million." What's going to stop another guy from coming up and saying, "No, I'll only charge you $1 million"? And then the next guy comes up and says, "No, I'll charge you 100,000," and we get that price back down.
That's all very romanticized. That you got this idea of utopia.
Well, what you had was a lifeboat scenario, so I don't see how it's really different.
He's assuming the water
competition is going to be more likely.
It really depends on how.
Wait, hold on. One of you talk and then the other.
Yeah, it really depends on how easily accessible water is, and if that's the only water there is, and that guy is the one who is in need of it, then we need to get the water to him and make sure no one else gets it, and pricing everyone else out of the market is how we can do that.
Well, that's all a very romanticized view of it again, that you think they're all going to compete, but they're probably not. These capitalists are actually probably colluding behind the scenes because they want to realize there's going to be a minimum wall to this, and it's not the actual value of the product. It's going to be significantly higher than that.
Wait, what's the value?
Point me to the people who are colluding, because I'm going to come in and compete. I mean, you don't really get collusion like that without support from a government of some kind, because the incentive is so strong, either for a new competitor to come in and offer it at a lower price and get all the business, or for one of the conspirators to go turncoat and lower his price. The incentive is just too strong.
But you're not going to lose any profit instead.
No, you're going to get the profit because they're going to buy your water instead of buying it from the other guys.
What Shane means is, say we have this water cartel, right? We have a bunch of people colluding to keep water at the same price. Now, one guy decides to just, dip, maybe just a little bit. He starts taking everyone else's business. He starts selling water to people, making it more available, and it becomes extremely profitable for him to break from the collusion.
Okay. What is going to stop the water cartel from using violence to shut down the competition. I mean, they have a larger amount of money that they can buy private security firms with, which they can use violently to shut down the competition.
Actually,
but now they're putting a lot of money into buying this security, which means they're even less profitable than they were before.
Actually,
and it's not like they're the only ones that are going to have these weapons.
Actually, there is a historical example of this. Are you familiar with the Dow Corporation?
Oh, you're talking about the Bromine incident, Daniel?
Yes.
Yep, I know all
Herbert
about
Dow
that.
in the Brom Convention.
Yeah. Yep, yeah. For those that don't know, Herbert Dow, basically he was a really gifted businessman and chemist, and he found a way to manufacture bromine at a very cheaper cost, and he was very successful in the United States. And he decided, you know what? I heard the Europeans want chemicals, so I'll start selling in Europe. Well, there was a cartel of German companies, all of whom were backed by the German government, that said, hey, we don't want this American competing. This is our market. So what they did was that they colluded to lower their price lower than his, that he couldn't compete. But he caught wind of this, and what he did was that.
Okay, Chris is cutting out. I'm going to take the rest of the story from here. So,
okay.
Yeah, so bromine was going for something like 40 cents a pound or something like that. And so they said, okay, we'll show this upstart American. We're going to go dump a whole lot of bromine on the American market at 10 cents a pound. So, and then he won't be able to make a profit, and he'll go out of business, and we'll have the market to ourselves. Well, what Dow did was he instructed his purchasing agents to go and buy up all the 10 cent a pound bromine and then go over to Europe and sell it for 15 cents a pound.
Well, I mean,
he ended up undercutting them with their own product.
Yep, and the German cartel ended up going to his door, and they said, "Okay, you win." So here's the deal.
Hold on, Chris. Ancom was trying to say something.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to say anything specific. I was just.
Then Chris, go ahead.
Okay. Yep, and basically how it all ended was the German cartels came up to him, to Herbert Dow, and said, "Okay, you win. Here's what we'll do. Europe is up for competition, but you stay out of Germany." And that was the deal, and that's what they agreed on.
Yeah, in fact, the German government made it so that only the Brom Convention members could sell in Germany. So that was actually the law.
Yeah, that's another thing I never get about some people, who talk about monopolies as being a fault of capitalism. Monopolies only occur in areas where government has a lot of control over the market.
And a
good example.
Randall McMurphy just posted in the chat room, if these people are making a killing on water, they're going to go at a great means to find more water, increasing the supply and making the environment a much better place. So if water is being sold, a bottle of water is being sold for $1 million, hey, well, how much is it to dig a well? A few thousand? I mean, you dig far enough anywhere you are, you're going to hit water eventually. So
there's also
let's start to discover it. Yeah, I mean, both. Yeah, that's the case. I mean, with other things, it might not be the case.
There's also an analogy. This analogy: is it more profitable to sell water to one person for $1 million, or to 10 people for $500,000?
And also consider this: what happens after you sell the guy water for $10 million and then the drought's over or whatever, and people say, well, that guy, he charged $10 million for a bottle of water. I don't want to do business with him. I'm going to do business with his competitors. And everyone just leaves him in droves, and he ends up going out of business. That actually happened at this one place after, I don't remember if it was after 9/11 or after Katrina, after one of those, where there was that panic about a gas shortage. And this guy who owned a convenience store kind of panicked and just shot his prices up to like $8 a gallon or something like that. People stopped buying gas from him, and he went out of business.
Oh, well, just rebrand yourself. Give yourself a different name, and people will forget. The idea is to keep people stupid. Don't keep people smart enough to be aware of the trade. You want people to be stupid.
Well, how are you going to keep them stupid, though?
Keep them mindless consumerists.
I mean, we know how government does it with the
question is,
education
how are you
system.
going
We've
to-
heard everyone into indoctrination camps for 12 years, but how's an anarcho-capitalist system going to do that? Especially when you have all these different interests who want to indoctrinate children in different ways.
I mean, just don't bother about school. You don't need that. Instead, why don't you just encourage parents to put the kids in front of TV screens where they're just shown as 24/7?
I mean, you're suggesting that that would be done through some sort of advertising, like, or anti-advertising.
But I mean, you still have the same issue. I mean, even if we grant your scenario, there's all sorts of channels that broadcast all sorts of different content, and some of them are going to be highly religious and teach the earth is 6,000 years old, and some of them are going to be like the Science Channel and say, okay, you know, here's how astronomy works, and here's how the earth formed, and things like that. I mean, you're going to have all this competition of ideas, even in that medium.
Well, the media has a lot of biases in it, including the sensationalism bias. So
yeah, but it's biases in different directions. You got some that are biased more towards religion, some that are biased more towards science, some that are biased more towards individualism, some that are biased more towards collectivism.
Basically,
there's no way any one of them is going to dominate.
Actually, do that. The media has a sensationalist bias, and a sensationalist bias will focus on things like celebrities. Oh, Donald Trump actually talked with Kanye West. Oh my God! Like, and this will drive a lot.
Well, some of them do, but then you have others like Breitbart that focus on other things.
The trick is to make the media outlets more accessible to as many people as possible, and the internet has been really great about that, since we have channels from all sorts of spectrums that can be established and spread at a very low cost.
I mean, the internet has opened up a lot of possibilities, yes.
And the internet, at its fundamentals, as far as people going on, I mean, it's fairly anarcho-capitalist, with a few exceptions. You can make a website, you know, saying anything you want and invite people to come on and post videos or write content for or whatever. And so, I mean, the old media used to have kind of this almost cartel-like control of things, but now with the internet, they don't have it because it's open to anyone. You know, you didn't have the government coming in with the FCC saying, no, we have to manage the public spectrum properly, and
that's why big media are some of the biggest pusher for the anti-piracy laws, because they can take advantage of it to shut down competing internet industries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, if companies want to protect their profits, they'll do it.
Yeah, but Ancom, when you get the government involved, it's no longer an anarcho-capitalist society. It's a corporatist society.
Well, instead,
and I think what you're missing in this thing about profit is it's not the case that X is going to be profitable and Y is not. X is going to have a market for some people, and Y is going to have a market for other people, and there's going to be a crossover that they'll be competing with. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, there's one kind of news outlet that everyone's going to be flocking to, and then they'll control. You know, I mean, we're seeing on the internet that that's absolutely not the case. It's going to be an amazing variety.
Basically, the market, wealth, and profit are not a zero-sum game inherently. They become a zero-sum game. They might become a zero-sum game if a state gets involved, but they are not necessarily one.
Well, this is another fundamental belief of anarcho-communism that might just baffle anarcho-capitalists, but I want to start on this because I think it will lead to some pretty interesting conversations. And that is the idea you ANCAPs believe taxation is theft, right?
Sure, yeah.
Well,
it is.
Taxation is theft in all cases.
Yeah, because you're using force to force people to give up money without them doing it voluntarily. If you want to convince them to do it voluntarily, I'm fine with that, but if you use force to do it, it's theft.
But again, we go back to the idea of what is coercion exactly? Does coercion always entail the idea of putting a knife or a gun to someone's head?
Or the threat of doing it, or some kind of fraud or anything like that.
So does this include the threat of having something withheld that will prevent you from living?
I don't get what it, I mean. It's like if you say we're not going to let you have water, and then you go to a creek and like, oh, we told you weren't going to have water, and you use a gun to force them to stop doing that. Then yeah, but I mean, if someone has water, you don't have.
Ancom is worried if someone owns a creek, for example, that they will do that.
I won't be surprised if the person who owns that land would. Yeah, it's like, you can't do that, you can't do that.
Well, that's the whole point of property rights, is having the ability to say who can and can't do anything.
You violated my non-aggression principle, now I have the ability to extort you for some amount of money.
Well, no, you just say, okay, you have to leave my property.
Well, that's what some people would do, but others would see this as a golden opportunity to exploit someone.
If you do anything beyond what is necessary to stop the aggression, then you become an aggressor as well.
Well, is it like they care?
This again, it ultimately, this is where it becomes a matter of dispute resolution. Our communities, say our federations might have systems for resolving this. If a congregation of members of our federations comes to resolve the dispute, that will be basically the solution, as far as I see it.
I see.
I'm sorry, I'm reading through the chats to see if there are any more questions.
Does that make sense, Ancom?
It sort of does, but it also leads to another thing which I've always been skeptical of, in anarcho-capitalism, which is the idea of private courts. And maybe I just don't know what they are, but...
Well, our private court would, in theory, be working with whatever dispute resolution your federation uses.
It could be what private court in a way sounds like is a slightly more hierarchical version of how a communist society would do it. A true communist. I'm not talking about USSR and that type of shit. I'm talking about full communism. So how they do it, which they would all decide in their community, but I'm not sure how private courts work.
Well, how would they decide it, though?
Is that how private courts work, or do they work differently?
How would the Ancom society decide it?
Private courts work basically like this. Say you and Shane get in this dispute.
Uh-huh.
Now you both agree to seek out my judgment on this dispute. I am the arbiter. You both agree to adhere to whatever conclusion I come to. And this has to be necessarily a mutual agreement.
So okay, it has to be a mutual agreement.
You can't have, say, Shane go to one guy and say, I agree to his arbitration. Actually, this is a bit of a different issue, but okay, first you agree to me. If I make a verdict, if you both agree to me ahead of time, then you have to go to that verdict. You could also, in theory... Actually, no. I was thinking you could also, in theory, seek separate arbiters to discuss amongst themselves and come to a verdict.
Well, I mean, that would be like, if you talk about the DDRO, I've contracted with the DDRO, so if, hey, this guy's on my property and he won't leave, can you come take care of him? He's got his DDRO, and he says, no, I have a right to be here. Those two organizations will get together and work it out, and if they can't work it out, then they'll go to a mutually agreed upon third party who will make the decision.
Okay, because my original idea of what a private court was, and it'd probably be assuming by the name of it, was that a private court was basically a company that provided a justice service in a way.
In a sense, but remember, in anarcho-capitalism, you're not coming up with one way that you're forcing on people. We're just giving you ideas for things that might happen, but I mean, there could be other people who have other ideas that work even better.
I never debated that. I meant what I thought of private courts before you told me was that they were sort of a private institution, a business of some sort, which provided a service of, sorry, my brain's turning into mush.
Yeah, I mean, that would be basically it. Essentially, we would both be paying the arbiter to come to a decision, and then he would come to a decision, and whoever he decided in favor of would get
Though in a
his money
certain
back or
type of
whatever.
dispute, it goes to loser pays, I imagine.
Yeah, that's what I was
just
getting at.
a saner option.
I mean, also, there could be corruption involved in that, couldn't there? I mean,
But I mean, that's where competition comes in, because if a DDRO is corrupt, no one's going to want to do business with them.
well, they just advertise and hide it.
How do they hide it? I mean, you say they advertise it like it's some kind of panacea. If advertising worked, we'd all be drinking new Coke. We're not. The thing died the death, and Coke had to kind of tuck their tails between their legs and go, okay, Coke Classic.
Well, I'm not saying it always works. I'm not saying it's fundamentally flawless.
You can't do it to make people want something that they don't want.
That's just a little off topic, but that's an argument that I never understood as the whole, consumerist society, because the truth is, contrary to what some doomsayers like to say, people don't fall for advertisements like South Park portrays it, where they buy it just because it's bright and flashy. I see commercials all the time on the internet and on TV, and it doesn't make me want to go out and buy shit, And
of course, between our two societies, you could also have a heavy counter-consumerist movement, say, debunking various advertising and spreading that.
Exactly. That's another thing. Here's a classic example I've seen in movies and stories that, in my opinion, just makes me laugh, because in real life it doesn't work, which is where basically the scam is that you, in the technology industry, is that you make a product, but you deliberately make it all buggy, so that way people are forced to upgrade it for years and thus pay you more money. But the reason why that doesn't work, and what really killed it, was the invention of the media, because now if you deliberately make a defective product and you do something like that, there's going to be a guy out there that's going to post on a popular review site saying, don't buy this product, it's faulty and defective, and they force you to pay a ludicrous price to fix it, and no one's going to buy from you.
Yeah, I mean, you buy a product, just go on to YouTube, search for the product, you'll find people review it, you'll find people doing unboxings, and you'll learn all about it.
Hold on.
Some companies have terrible reputations, yet people still buy from them.
Now that's the issue we have to solve. We have to understand why that is.
Because ethical consumerism is a fucking pipe dream. It doesn't work.
Except we've given several examples of it working.
Except if someone's poor, if they don't have much money, then they will have to rely on buying something that was made with what is essentially slave labor, rather than buying something that was made without slave labor, because they have to stretch their budget more.
How are you going to get slave labor in an anarcho-capitalist society?
I don't know, just import it from some other society outside of it.
Okay, this is where we're kind of falling apart here.
Yeah, let's go to another point from the chat room from Rumco. I only sell my labor and risk very little capital. Some of the people who bought my labor lost a lot of money through their companies. Explain that. So if I go to work for someone, I'm going back to the chair example. I'm going to go to this guy and I'm going to build chairs for him, and he's going to give me money. And that's really easy for me. I don't really have any skin in the game. And if I lose my job, that kind of sucks, but it's no worse than where I started out making the chairs on my own. But him, he's put all sorts of resources, like the guy who made the net, the guy who, went hungry for a day to make the fishing net that we were talking about. He made sacrifices to get to that place. And if his business goes down and he loses all of that, he's not back to square one because he's got everything that he sacrificed. He's lost everything that he sacrificed for basically nothing.
Like if I invest in starting up a factory, I'm either taking out a loan and going into a lot of debt usually, or spending a significant chunk of my savings. And when I lose the factory, I don't necessarily just lose the factory. I lose what I invested to get that factory.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Peter Schiff one time, and he brought up a pretty good point one time when he was debating with collectivists. He says, you know, my biggest beef with communists.
Now remember, Ancom's not a collectivist.
Well, yeah, I know, but anyway, he said the biggest problem I have with you know, people who advocate for, you know, redistribution or communal sharing of goods is that they always talk about sharing the wealth, but why don't they share the risk? You know, and he points that out because he says, look, if my company goes under, I've invested a lot of my money and my resources into it, and if my company goes bankrupt, I lose almost everything, whereas my workers, they'll lose their jobs, but they can easily find another place to work at. You know, I can't do that, you know, once I go bankrupt.
Basically, the idea is that the capitalist, that the workers don't necessarily share in the same risk that the capitalist does, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the strongest arguments that capitalists use, as far as I know. And in a way, they do have a point that, yes, there is a risk that's required to set up a society. I mean, is it risk for me to get together with a bunch of other intelligent left-wing individualists and all go together to try and set up our own society? I mean, that's a risk, isn't it?
Yes, how much risk is everyone taking in that system?
In a way, if I do that, I mean, I'm taking a massive risk.
Yes, but compared to everyone else in the scenario.
I think what he's saying is like the first people who are going to go out and set up this anarcho-communist society are taking this incredible risk. Once it's established, people are just going to basically be walking in at pretty much zero risk to themselves.
So we'd argue that you guys taking that risk gives you a little bit more entitlement to a lot of what's going on there. Inherently, you get a lot more decision-making power and pull, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There might need to be a temporary position of that just to maintain the structure, to set it up right before you relinquish that power. But
isn't that what Lenin said? I think that's where we got the Soviet Union from, that concept.
Now, again, that's kind of a bit of a fallacy, because, again, we actually do support... What we actually technically, Shane, do support a Leninist concept. We just don't see it that way.
Yeah, but I mean, I wasn't talking about the end result. I was talking about, you know, how we get there. Okay, temporarily, we're going to have this situation be the way it is, and that sort of thing has been tried, and it's always ended up not being so temporary.
But I didn't mean that. Well, you know, I didn't mean on a massive scale. I just meant a small little community to start off with.
Yeah, the question, of course, is how do we solve the historical problem of it? We see it having a problem, but we need to understand what causes it.
And related to this is another question that several people in the chat room have asked, which is specifically, what is your plan to get the people to shed their selfish ways and become altruistic and work for the public good? How do you transition to that society?
Well, I'll tell you this, you probably didn't know this until now, but I'm actually more of an egoist.
Egoism is egoism.
That's essentially.
Yeah, egoism is basically purported mainly by Max Steimer.
So,
basically, that it's very similar to Adam Smith's idea of enlightened self-interest.
I do believe in the idea of self-interest, and my self-interest is to be surrounded by people who are freaking idiots, to say the least. I think the best way to have a society where people aren't idiots is a society where everyone's free to pursue their own happiness.
That sounds like capitalism to me.
again,
communism to me.
it all boils down to our disparate definition. Again, because me and Ancom have been talking about this for a long time, and actually this is the foundation of the video that got me into the whole group, where we fundamentally misunderstand each other's positions by definition.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
We have more similarities than we have differences.
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally we agree, because my thing is, as long as you're not initiating force on anyone, as long as you're not forcing anyone to go along with it, I'm cool with whatever you do.
I think we agree with that in like the first 10 minutes of this.
Yeah.
I mean, we could change from that.
I think we're just trying to understand your approach, and I mean, I think as soon as we agreed with that, it became more of an academic discussion, because, you know, if it ever came to that, then either one of us would be right and the other one would be wrong, and one would succeed and one would fail, or both would exist to some measure.
Or both wouldn't exist, who knows?
Yeah. Someone would think of something even better.
God, I love democratic confederationalism.
Let's all go to Richard, people.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't really believe in democracy.
Yeah, I don't really either.
Admittedly, democratic confederationalism seems to be a bit of a misnomer. I just call it plain old anarcho-confederationalism.
I think that's a fair way to put it, actually, because it essentially is confederationalism taken to its logical extreme.
I think if you are going to have democracy, it should be more of a Robert Heinlein thing, where you need a 2/3 vote to do something, but only a 1/3 vote to undo it, you know, when it comes to passing laws or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's pretty funny about Robert Heinlein, because everyone loves to criticize the book Starship Troopers and say, "Oh, the Terrain Federation is fascist because it has limited voting." But here's the thing: civilians and citizens, they all have the same basic rights. They're not discriminated against. The only difference is that a citizen can vote. You know. And one thing I do agree with Robert Heinlein is that if you got to vote, you got to earn the right to vote. You can't just automatically get it, which you could call me cynical, but I think that would solve, you know, some of the dumb voters we have today.
And of course, our federations, as we're calling them, for lack of a better word, are structured more along a panarchist system rather than a geographical one.
Well, actually, I want to go back to what Shane said. I've already forgot what it was, because Chris, you just had to interrupt, didn't you?
Wait, what? Sorry, you're not coming in very clearly.
Yeah, your audio seems like it's dropping out or something.
You're Dalleking.
Again, great.
Stupid capitalist microphone.
Agreed. Agreed. I have the capital to start my own, you know, company to make this shit. I have the capital to do it. So I'll just have to live with what I've got, a piece of shit. Anyway, what did you say? I forgot now.
Wait, what did we say?
You were going to go back to something I had said earlier. I'm not sure what it was.
Yeah. Before Chris started talking about a book.
Oh, hi. No, Chris had talked about Starship Troopers.
66%. You know what that actually sounds a lot like? It actually sounds a lot like the idea of decision making that many anarcho-communists advocate for, which is consensus decision making.
That sounds more like anarcho-syndicalism.
Actually, yeah. Now I'm just thinking of Dennis.
Well, to be honest, I just see syndicalism as a tactic rather than an ideology in its own.
Syndicalism is a tactic similar to how agorism and counter-economics are a tactic, sort of a transition.
Yes. Except my tactic is the dual power idea.
Though I'd say syndicalism can work along with dual powers if you have a dual power that is structured in a syndicalist fashion, for example.
I'm questionable over syndicalism because, yes, it might have used to work in it. And it's had many successes back then. However, now we're in a society where the state and the market, as powerful as they are, collude with one another, and you'll probably call that corporatism or fascism. merger of state and corporate power, as Mussolini said. Right?
Yes, we reject that completely.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Don't we all?
All right, let's go at this from another direction. Then let's say that all the ANCAPs and all the ANCOMs get together, and we're going to eliminate the initiation of force from the world. No more government, no more anyone with the power to initiate force, and everyone has the means of defending themselves, so none of that can happen. And at that point, the ANCAPs are going to say, okay, we're done. That's all we wanted. We're going to be over here living our lives. What do you do at that point?
Well, that's a perfect time to go off and create your own society free from the state and the market, because I think the market is as well.
Okay, well, specifically, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it?
Well, I'm going to create a self-sustainable society using technologies. It becomes cheaper as technology advances. It becomes cheaper, and we're able to make use of things like 3D printers and automation of workplaces to basically have people, where they're lazy and
basically
more capitalist inventions, in other words.
Not really. I mean, it's more state inventions than anything.
Basically,
the state didn't invent 3D printing.
Basically, not necessarily 100%.
The technology behind that comes from state sectors like NASA, for example. The amount of inventions that come from NASA.
Basically, not necessarily 100% post-scarcity, but close enough for him and his society to be satisfied.
And actually, that's kind of a myth. Very, very little of it actually came from NASA. NASA was, like, people were talking about the space pen that writes upside down and everything, and NASA spent all this money developing it. No, NASA didn't spend all that. An independent guy, invented it just because he thought it would be a good idea, and NASA just bought it. Same thing with like Tang and stuff like that. All of that was invented by private people in the market, and NASA looked around and said, hey, we can make use of that. I mean, they invented very little on their own.
Basically, NASA popularized it, you're saying.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure NASA money going into it certainly didn't hurt the industry any, but, you're talking about, where does all this come from? You don't really see much of that. That's why Venezuela is not exactly a hotbed of technology. It's Silicon Valley, which is run under a completely different idea.
Hey guys, can I read a question out from the chat? Because this guy Sinji Tarbris said earlier, he talks about how you want to cultivate this this culture of people working for the public good. He wants to know how exactly are you going to do that? Because
basically, I think he wants to convince people. I think he
wants to go through this and say people will do that because they want. Because if we get people to actually care about their environment more, their nearby environment. For example, people take care of the houses. You don't have to pay them to do that.
Okay, what he's saying is, what Ancom is saying, to put it in more of our lexicon, is he wants to do it by convincing people that it is the best thing in their own self-interest to do this.
The problem I have with that is, look at how many times people, even completely unconsciously, they think they're doing something that's going to benefit themselves, and they actually end up hurting themselves. And I think the beauty of capitalism is that through the free market and the price mechanism, what you're actually doing is giving people the incentive to make better use of the resources they have available in order to maximize their own personal benefit from that. Even if they don't even understand, what, if you had asked me 5 years ago, what are the kind of things I'm going to own? I'd kind of say, I don't know. TV, back in the year 2000, I couldn't have told you I would own a smartphone because I didn't know what that was.
Actually, Henry Ford had a quote on that, didn't he? If I had given people what they wanted, it would have been faster horses.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, Ancom, I've talked about this in the chat before, but I highly recommend reading iPencil to get an understanding of what we mean when we say market signals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because most of the resources that go into making a pencil are made by people who aren't trying to make a pencil, maybe aren't even realizing that their product's going to end up making a pencil, maybe even not knowing what a pencil is, if they're in some, a more impoverished area of, South America where they've never seen a pencil.
Yeah, actually, one of the people in the chat used this earlier, only he used an example of a sandwich. He says he gets the bread from a bakery, who's just making bread. They're not exactly trying to make a sandwich bread. He gets the meat from a butcher shop. The butcher, the meat could be used for any type of food product. And he gets, the lettuce and tomatoes from produce, which again, isn't exactly going to make sandwiches. None of these people probably know each other. They don't cooperate with each other to make a sandwich, but they provide the materials to make a sandwich because they want to make money.
Basically,
and imagine if the butcher had to say, okay, well, we need this much because we need this many for sandwiches, we need this many for hamburgers, this many for this, we need this and that and everything else. Imagine if they had to try to sit down and figure all of that out. But through the market, through the price mechanism, they just follow what the prices are doing and do what's profitable, and that's how it all gets distributed.
Well, the thing is, what you get with that society is you get a
we're wondering
everyone does things the same. People don't take risks because people try to avoid taking risks. All right, what do you want to say?
Oh, sorry. I'm very sorry about this, but basically, what we're asking is how. We're concerned, again, going back to the chair analogy, we're going under I think we're making a mistake in going under the assumption that production will work from that distribution will work from some inherently horizontal rather than necessarily bottom-up system.
I'm not sure what you're getting at with that.
Well, basically, we're assuming that the creation and distribution of resources will be inherently reliant on everybody within the community coming together in a workers' collective and voting on it, for example.
Yeah, because that's really kind of top-down thing. And one thing you really see when you look at iPencil is, because you're talking about, capitalism is hierarchical. If you read iPencil, you see how little there actually is in the way of hierarchies. You have all these mini hierarchies, like the logging company and the company that digs up the metal or whatever, and then of course the pencil company there at the very end. But they're not all arranged with each other in some kind of hierarchy. It's just a peer-to-peer system.
But let's just try to avoid getting into semantics again. I need to remember that when you say capitalism, what it means to me is individualism, not what I think capitalism is.
I'm still not really clear on what you think capitalism is.
I'm going to put it as the economic system based on three things, didn't I?
Yes, basically.
The means of production and their operation for profit.
Yeah, and that's what's happening in iPencil. You have all of these little independent businesses, none of which have any kind of power or status over the other, none of which really want to make a pencil except at the very end with the pencil company, and yet you get all of the resources in place for the pencil to be made.
Yes.
It almost sounds like to me, it almost sounds like how some weird accidental inventions that came around, and one of them, for example, is is crisps, what you guys call chips, okay?
Potato chips.
Oh, we all know that story, I'm pretty sure. George Crumb?
Some angry fucking customer. And he got
George Crumb, that's actually not true. George Crumb did not invent the potato chip.
It was some
the earliest.
Hold on. Before you go too far into it, I don't think I'm familiar with this story. What is it that's not true?
The story goes that potato chips were invented by George Crumb because he had a customer that was complaining that that the fries that was served with his steak weren't salty enough and they were fat and soggy. So apparently out of pure frustration, he sliced the potatoes really, really thin, fried them to a crisp, and then basically dipped them in salt. And apparently the customer liked them, but that's not true because it's a legend. Potato chips we don't know for certain, but the first mention of potato chips or crisps, as they're known in the UK, comes from a book written by a cook called called Kitchener. Yeah, Teal Deer did an episode about this when he was debunking the Black History Month video that that MTV made, where they claimed that it was blacks who invented the potato chip.
Oh, okay.
But the urban legend does serve as a useful analogy. So.
Well, it does. I mean, you could also use the example of how the ice lolly was invented or discovered in a way when someone left something like a cup of water outside with a straw in it and it's frozen. And then they picked it up by the straw and started licking it.
Or like Elmer's glue. Supposedly the story is, I don't know if it's actually true, but it's like his wife had spilled some milk on the floor and just for a second, it was kind of like curdled milk, I think, because this was, over 100 years ago or whenever. But she had just put a newspaper over it, just take care of it for the time being. And then several minutes later, she went back and tried to clean it up, and the newspaper was completely stuck to the floor. And so that's how he figured out how to start inventing Elmer's glue.
I'm seeming to remember something about meat and maggots.
Meat and maggots?
Yeah, like someone put this thing of meat out, and like maggots or flies started forming around it.
Oh, no, you're talking about spontaneous generation, the myth that the flies were born out of the meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what you do is say, okay, we'll cover it, and you see no flies, and they say, well, of course not, because you've cut off the air. Okay, well, you put a fine mesh over the top, and now the flies are on top of the mesh, and the maggots are on the mesh. The maggots come out of the mesh, or appear to, because they're hatching, but they don't come out of the meat. So, that proved that they weren't coming out of the meat; that the flies were laying eggs and they were coming from the flies.
and it was good old Louis Pasteur who invented the gooseneck tube, which debunked spontaneous generation once and for all, because a lot of people assumed well, bacteria came from like rotten gravy or whatever, but because they cut off air, the bacteria can't get there. Well, the gooseneck allows air to come in, but no bacteria.
Oh, and here's what I bet is one of my favorite accidents. At least
if you tip the gooseneck over and let the air in, then the bacteria grows.
At least I imagine it was an accident. Jeez.
That was so many thousands of years ago. I don't know. I mean, there were probably a lot of accidents, and there were probably a lot of people just trying things, and it's probably a combination of both. But
yep. Oh yeah. Yep.
I think
hell, beef jerky was invented because it came from the days before refrigeration, because on ships they wanted to figure out, okay, how can we prevent all this meat from spoiling because they didn't have refrigeration, and someone eventually discovered, well, if you soak it in like vinegar mixed with salt, it kills most of the bad bacteria and dries it out so mold can't form. So
yeah, and cured ham is the same way, because you slaughter a pig, that's a lot of meat, and the meat needs to last the family a while. So how do you make the meat last? And so that's cured ham.
Yeah. Anyway, we kind of went off a tangent. Sorry.
Yeah. Can we stop talking about this? You're making me hungry.
Now the thing about chocolate ice cream sundaes is.
Now, what were you saying, Ancom? Sorry.
I can't even remember now.
I'm sorry, man.
It's fine.
That's how this group is. If anything, you caught us on a good day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you were saying something our iPencil reminded you of the potato chip story.
Yeah, in a way. And that just led us into this complete mess.
Yeah.
But I mean, the whole point is that in a capitalist system, people don't need to get together and agree on things or figure out what's going on. You follow the money, and the money kind of tells you, okay, this much meat needs to go here and this much needs to go there. You don't need to know how much of it is going for sandwiches or hamburgers or whatever. You don't need to know how much wood is going for pencils or for other things. There are just people who are willing to buy what you're selling, and that's how you distribute it.
Basically, we're trying to figure out how things are distributed without a price mechanism.
Right.
Yeah, and I believe that answered another question, because another guy who I can't find his comment, but he did have a question about well, what about how do Ancoms accommodate the lack of information, because you know, and like where did it, like, because you got to have the question about where to target, where to market, and all that. So I believe we just answered that.
Well, and you also have people with diverse interests. I mean, if we're talking about, oh, we're going to get together and figure out what to do, well, maybe half of the people really like steak, the other half really like seafood. So how are you going to determine, you know, how much steak and how much seafood there is? And
I mean, I see a society where everyone's, you know, got their basic needs covered and they're free to achieve their own form of happiness. Like, this will allow people to follow their passions, and it will allow people to make their own, you know, restaurants, not for profit, but because they're actually passionate in it.
Sounds great to me, but how do you get there? How do you get to the point where all their needs are covered?
Well, in a way, I talked about the idea of achieving self-sufficiency, didn't I?
Well, he's talking about, say, 3D printing and other sorts of technologies that...
The idea is to embrace automation. Just completely embrace it in as many industries as possible.
I mean, even if you say, oh, we've already got 3D printers, let's use those, you still need the material to put in the 3D printers.
Yeah, you know, I mean, in all honesty, I never believe in the whole self-sufficient thing, because the truth is, and we see this on a global level, nobody has everything they need. You know, it's always going to be, you have two stuff of what you need, but you don't have that third thing you want, but your neighbor has one of the things you want, but you have one thing that he wants. You know, that's why all these countries and all these dictators who say we're going to make our nation self-sufficient, you know, that's why they're going bankrupt. That's actually why Africa is the way it is today, because after a lot of African countries, you know, gained their independence from the Europeans, they said their leaders, instead of, you know, somewhat adopting, you know, market policies, they said, okay, we're going to make our nation a self-sufficient community. And the result is that for many decades, they weren't allowed to get access to technologies in Europe and the United States. And the result is that people starved because they couldn't produce food and all their stuff effectively.
Now, guys, Shane and Chris, after I say this, please let Ancom speak.
Okay.
To summarize,
okay,
we don't oppose the idea of how your society would work in principle. We are questioning its actual applicability, whether it can be done.
So go ahead, Ancom.
I kind of went blank there for a second.
Sorry.
I just went blank.
You okay?
I just went blank, that's all. My mind just went blank.
Sorry.
I think our main concern is that you say, okay, well, we're going to get together and decide on that. How are they going to get the information they need in order to make that decision? It's not about really, well, it's like, if we have the information, we can decide on it, but how do you get that information?
Well, how you get that information well, I don't see why you couldn't actually have people analyzing this stuff. Like, it's not just a capitalist thing, really.
Well, people are doing that now, and they're failing at it miserably. Even with all this modern technology and instantaneous communications, they still can't do it.
It's basically what we call the economic calculation problem.
I see.
And I mean, you know, like you were saying, things like you were talking about, like everyone having their needs met, like that's a single objective, non-changing criteria. Whereas if you look at people 200 years ago, you know, take anyone from that time, a poor person, rich person, or whoever, show him a poor person in the USA today and say, oh, you see that guy needs to be paid more money, he needs to have all this. They'll say, what are you talking about? He's got all his needs met. Because they're as well off as anyone was 200 years ago. It's just that we've redefined what our needs are.
And this is, of course, going to the hierarchy of needs. I think what Ancom is talking about is the very bottom of the hierarchy.
And that's what you're talking about. I see it as going a few steps up. So the idea to achieve your own happiness is to complete the 4 steps below the 5th one. And when
why 4 and not 3 and not 6? And what about people who disagree on how many steps it should be?
Well, this is just a theory. This is a theory by Maslow, right? The Maslow hierarchy of needs, if you have heard of it.
Yeah, but I mean, it still seems very subjective to me. I mean, we consider electricity a basic technique. No one had electricity 200 years ago.
How do you define when someone has their needs met, essentially?
Well, when they don't have to rely on competing with others to get their own position in life, really.
That seems a little vague. What we're
yeah, I know, fucking flagging like I'm crazy.
Yeah, I mean, their position in life, what does that mean? People have different ideas. Some people just want to be left alone. Some people want to be active in their communities. Some people want to be, you know, a celebrity or widely regarded by others or whatever.
Yeah, you know. And if I may add my 2 cents into this, you know, I mean, one thing that a lot of communists tend to go by is that they want to create an altruistic society. But the truth is, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think altruism in its pure sense really exists, because everyone usually does something for their own benefit. You know, even if it's just that warm fuzzy feeling you get from you know, helping someone. I could argue, well, that's kind of a selfish reason in a way.
And of course, this hold on, sorry, Ancom. This goes into egoism, right, Ancom?
Yeah, there could be self-interest involved in that. I mean, helping a homeless person will give you bragging rights, sure. Say, I helped the homeless person. What have you done, eh? I mean, that's just bragging rights. That is an egoist way of looking at it.
Yeah, a lot of our concepts are similar, just under very different names. Enlightened self-interest.
That's why I have trouble talking to you, because it's all to do with semantics, really.
Yeah, what Steimer calls egoism, Adam Smith calls enlightened self-interest.
Yeah, and Ayn Rand calls selfishness.
Yeah.
Objectivism, or whatever.
Well, objectivism isn't 100% libertarianism.
But yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah, especially if you read Ayn Rand's comments on libertarianism.
I don't understand that. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can gather, like, she was mostly libertarian. However, she did feel that that the non-aggression principle wasn't the correct way, and that it was okay to initiate force under certain situations, which I don't agree on.
That's why I get annoyed when people try to cite Rand as an argument against us.
I mean, I used to do that, but yeah, like, such as an authoritarian, so fuck her. And that's not what I want to do, so don't lump me in with all the social justice warrior Ancoms out there, which do.
Yeah, citing Rand against us is like citing Bad Mouse against you.
Pretty much a good way of putting it. I mean, that guy's blatant support for all the anti-fascist strident effect.
Oh
yeah, but that's what we're driving home. You know, I mean, so many people, like, we're talking about Milo Yiannopoulos and all that. They're always like, "Oh my God, why are all these right wing assholes gaining popularity?" And I just want to say,
because you're making such an effort to silence them.
That's the exact same reason why neo-Nazism is scarily making a comeback in Europe. It's not because of white patriarchy. It's because you're doing everything in your power to censor them. And as this one British guy pointed out, that's not stopping them. That's martyrizing them.
Yes, and I'll tell you what else. All right, Holocaust revisionism is illegal in many parts of Europe, Germany, France, Poland, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Does that stop people from doing it? No. It makes it more interesting and more, oh my God, what is the government hiding from us?
Well, and it gives it an air of verisimilitude because you're elevating it to the level of a threat as opposed to just this kooky fringe idea.
It becomes something like the belief, it makes people believe there's more of a conspiracy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a little, and this
well,
is a little.
That, it makes them think there's something worth going through all that to oppose.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This might be a little off topic, but, you know, I think another thing that kind of fueled the Holocaust revisionism is you can call me a cynical on this one, but, you know, as horrible as the Holocaust was, you know, I mean, people really love to shove it in our faces like this was the worst tragedy in human history, and I'm like, look, I read world history as for a hobby, and there have been people from centuries ago that make Adolf Hitler look like a Girl Scout.
All right, Ancom?
Absolutely. I mean, when you do that, I mean, what's going on there is the Jews are just using it to make a victim complex out of it. And it's very effective because the term anti-Semitism is a very powerful term.
But I mean, if you make a victim out of yourself, aren't you just elevating the other side to a level of power? Otherwise, how are they
I'm
able to make you a victim?
I'm a little mixed on the whole Israeli situation because I do believe that the Israeli...
Hold on, Chris.
I mean, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to draw sympathy towards you with that.
Daniel.
That's what's going on with them.
All right, anyway, go on, Chris.
You know, that's actually why I'm a little mixed on the whole Israeli issue because on one hand, yes, the Israeli government is being a bunch of jackasses and all that, but the problem is that with like everything, this whole Israeli-Palestine situation always borders line like there's this dichotomy of extremism, whereas you have to be behind Israel and you have to support like all the bombings they do, or you have to be on the side of the other extreme, which is Israel has no right to exist as a nation, and that all the Jews have to be kicked out of the Middle East and everything returned back to the Palestinians. And I don't think we should do that, you know. I mean,
yeah,
seriously,
it's not an either-or thing.
Yeah, seriously.
There actually was a proposed solution to the Israeli-Arab conflict that was very similar to democratic confederationalism and dual powers.
Well, here's how it actually started.
Wait, hold on, Chris.
Are we going into like the Jewish question now?
Well, here's the whole thing that actually happened with the history of Israel was because, you know, I mean, a lot of people like to blame the Middle Eastern problems on the U.S., you know, relationship with Israel, which is partially responsible. But here's what really happened. See, the original policy was Israel was that the British mandate in Palestine would be divided based on, you know, more like the population density. The area with the highest number of Jews, they would be unified to the state of Israel, and the highest population of Palestinians would be Palestine, and Jerusalem would serve as an international zone that was a part of both nations. And guess what? The Jews and the Palestinians, they agreed. They loved the terms. It was very equal. What happened was that outside states like the Arab League, the Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent Europe didn't like this idea, and they basically convinced the Arab League to go in and attack Israel. Israel retaliated, and as a result, it caused this massive wave of anti-Arab and Zionist extremism to take over, and Israel went from a relatively peaceful society to a more, you know, aggressive foreign policy.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, welcome Jonathan Lochet to the chat.
Oh, hey, John.
Hey, John.
Have you talked to Ancom before?
This is the first time in a while I've shown up. Yes, no, contrary to rumors, I am not dead.
That's good.
I have not been Clinton death by suicide while I was handcuffed.
Okay, so getting back to Ancom, just for another topic for coverage, just to get your idea on things. I know you said you wouldn't stop us from having, you know, our own private property, our own, you know, land or businesses or whatever. But as far as your little anarcho-communist enclave and how you're doing something, what kind of private property would you, I don't want to say allow because you've already said you wouldn't, you know, use force to stop anyone, but what kind of property do you think is the kind everyone should have? And what sort of property is the thing everyone should try to avoid in order to keep this communist ideal?
Hold on, Shane. Basically, what Shane is asking is the distinction between what you call private property and what you refer to as personal possession.
I used to do that all the time, but like I used to, you know, even in this debate sort of thing. I mean, you know, he said it was a conversation. It's turned into a debate. Let's be honest.
It's more
what I experienced was a debate in my own brain, more or less. It's the debate between the new individualist me and an older side of me that's just trying to hold on to broken ideas. It's true.
Okay, but I don't really think it might be the audio dropping out, but I don't really think I got an answer to the question as to what the distinction between the two is.
Well, usually what communists say the distinction between the two is do you use the item in question? And the second question is, do you make money from it? If the answer to the first one is no, and the answer to the second one is yes, if you don't use something that you make money from it, for example.
Like, if you're not directly working the factory line, but you're making money from it, that's what they would consider
yes, that's what they
private property.
Yes. I mean, I realize I should mainly avoid those type of debates because I think there's less black and white than that.
This is what I was getting earlier about the farmer and all of that. Why do things suddenly get different just because money's come into the middle of it?
I'll tell you what's been going on here. It's been a debate in my own brain, this. What's been going on is I have been arguing with two sides of me. The new, more egoist side of me, the more individualist side that is trying to beat out the old collectivist side of me. Because I used to be very collectivistic. And I've still got a lot of the, still hold on to a lot of things from that. I'm trying to beat them away, if you like.
Wait, what you're saying is our whole discussion is causing some interesting thoughts and dissonance in...
Absolutely it is.
So it sounds like this is still a journey that you're taking, and your current form isn't anywhere near the finish line, as it were.
I'll never stop. It's what an intellectual does. An intellectual doesn't just shut the mind off from the world.
Exactly.
They allow different perspectives to come to them.
I'd like to.
Why else would you be in a room with Ancoms like this? You want?
Yeah, I'd like to think our side, Shane, Chris, John, we'd have a lot to learn from each other. We're not anywhere near the finish line either. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but I think that's kind of the whole point of our side. We don't know what the best way is for other people to do things. We don't even really know what the best way is for ourselves in our own lives. We're just trying to figure things out, and we just want the freedom to do that.
That's just true for individualism.
For our guest here real quick. And this just sort of, like, for my own self. I own a fairly large piece of property. There's other vegetables and stuff, and occasionally on the weekends I take them out to a flea market to sell them. So where in this philosophy again does sort of cross the line of just personal property to being sort of the capitalist pig doing this just for profit?
Well, since you're growing them yourself, he would probably argue it's personal property. So if you're using it in profiting...
Well, he's here. You can let him argue it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's exactly it. So just continue with what you're saying.
Sorry. Basically, you're both working you're both growing the oranges, putting in the labor, and profiting from it. So it's personal. If you were growing the oranges but not profiting from it, it would still not be personal. If someone else was growing the oranges but you were not profiting from it, it would be personal. But if someone else was growing the oranges but you were profiting from it, it would be private.
Is that the idea, Ancom?
Well, that's how most communists see that.
How do you see it?
Well, I see it as that, but there's a few more gray areas.
Yeah, because my thought when I hear that is like, okay, let's say I suck at growing oranges, but I've got the land, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to work with computers, which I'm good at, and then some of the money I take, or maybe even all of the money I take from working with computers, I give it to someone who knows how to grow oranges to grow my oranges for me, and then he gets that, and then I take my oranges to sell them. So I don't really see any... It's not just that I don't see any moral difference. I don't see any effective difference either, because everyone's still being compensated for everything that they do.
Again, it boils down to labor theory versus subjective theory, I think.
Yes,
I'm not even going that far. I mean, if you want it even in a more tight circle, let's say that the orange grower is the guy whose computers I'm working on.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, I
will say something like that, I think. Any anarcho-communist would say, well, okay, that's fine because you're all working for mutual benefit. But as soon as you bring in money, I don't really see how it becomes different.
Hold on, let Ancom.
So is what we're getting into more there, That seems to be turning into sort of a type of mutual aid in a way. you know, let's say, for example, I'm shit at growing oranges, like, I don't know how to do it at all. And let's say I know how to fix a computer, per se, and then you know how to do the opposite. You're really good at growing oranges, but you need a computer fixed or something.
And money is just sort of a medium, because if I don't necessarily... Well, you know what, Shane, could you explain it, money as the medium between that?
Yeah, well, it's just like, okay, so the orange grower is growing oranges for me and I'm fixing his computers. Let's say he doesn't need the computers fixed, but someone else does, and that person is willing to pay me money. So I fix his computers, he pays me money, I pay the orange grower, he grows the oranges, and then I sell the oranges to someone else. You know, that's what money does. It facilitates that exchange without having to try to find an exact combination of how it specifically works. We don't have to seek each other out. You know, it's kind of like the problems with the old barter economy. You know, if I've got a cow and I've got milk and I need a suit, but the tailor doesn't need milk, but the tailor needs meat from the butcher, but the butcher doesn't need milk, he needs shoes from the cobbler. So I got to go to the cobbler and trade the milk for the shoes, and then I got to go to the butcher and trade the shoes for the meat, and then I got to go to the tailor and give him the meat, and money just simplifies all that. And the same thing is happening. Effectively, the same thing is happening. It's just a lot less legwork and a lot less confusion, and it really opens it up to the kind of economic transactions that make a nation wealthy.
Actually, Shane has a video on this called "What is Money?"
Yeah, and Shane, on the subject of what is money, I actually got into a flack. Actually, a lot of people got into a flack on me one time on this one forum because it was a Fallout forum and we were discussing, you know, Fallout stuff. And one thing I criticized about the Fallout universe was the whole bottle cap system. And I pointed out bottle caps in real life, they would not work as effective currency. And people were saying, well, why not? Isn't money just subjective? Maybe they think bottle caps are valuable. Yeah, I'm like, well, here's the thing with currency. Currency, in order for it to be effective, needs to have three things. It must be easy to transport. It's got to be divisible, and most importantly, it's got to be immune to counterfeiting. And in all honesty, bottle caps would be very.
There has to be some kind of limit on the production, because, like, if you look at Bitcoin is nothing.
Oh, don't get Ancom started on cryptocurrency.
But I mean, the point is, it's nothing. It's just numbers in a computer, but they're really easy to use. You've got a public ledger making sure that everything's on the up and up, and they're difficult to make.
Yeah, and also going back to the whole thing with the bottle caps, you know, I mean, a lot of people, you know, even the guy who runs game theory kind of fell for this fallacy, saying it's like, well, I mean, you know, when it's got beef behind it, it's still subjective. Because I mean, like, let's compare it. You know, for instance, we used to have the gold standard, but what can you do with gold? And I'm like, Mad Pat, did you pay attention in chemistry? Gold has a lot of useful properties.
Actually, what you're talking about, this was not an issue in Fallout 1 and 2, because early on, before the NCR came in, bottle caps were backed by the water merchants of the hub.
Yeah, but here's the thing, you know, once, you know, the Brotherhood of Steel and the scientists, you know, developed a way to purify the water, you have essentially destroyed water as being an effective backer, because now anyone with the right technology can purify water. The reason why gold is accepted is because not only is it useful, it's also a difficult resource to extract, and it requires more resources, thus it controls the gold system, you know.
Well, and you also don't want it to be too useful. That's where silver kind of fell short, especially when photography, you know, got really popular and you need all this silver to make the silver oxide. That kind of messed up the silver markets, you know, the monies that were based on silver.
Actually, in a fanfic I had for Fallout, there's one society that they issue currency and they back it up using platinum because most of the technology is fried. Platinum doesn't have the same use it still has, but it's still a pretty rare metal and difficult to find. So they use platinum as a backup for their currency, and it's mentioned that their currency is more valuable than the bottle cap.
Yeah, silver. Sorry, bad joke.
Yeah, it was a bad joke.
That's for Ancom, everyone.
Yeah, Ancom's always willing to point out when I make a bad joke.
Yes. I guess that wasn't as bad because Shane laughed.
All right, so final questions for Ancom?
Anyone?
Or anything you want to talk about, Ancom?
I can't really think of anything.
So, here's an important question. Has this been a pleasant experience for you, or have we been kind of hostile? I'm just,
Well, you know what I prefer? The thing is, I function a lot better in a one-on-one environment usually.
Oh, you should do a co-hosting spot with Shane if we can organize it then.
I'd be open to that.
All right, whatever.
Yeah, the trick will be figuring out. Would you be good to record the podcast around this same time frame at some point?
Well, the time we're doing this, that's pretty good.
Yeah, although it'd probably be on a Friday instead of a Thursday.
Friday's fine.
I thought we usually did. Oh yeah. Now I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's kind of pushing it for me to do it this early on a Friday. I normally like to do it around 6 p.m. But depending on how the scheduling of the week goes, I'm sure we can make it happen. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions from the chat room either, so I guess we're going to close it off. Thanks to everyone, and especially thanks for Ancom for coming into the ANCAP Lion's Den.
No problem. I wonder if you, Shane, will ever want to come into an Ancom Lion's Den.
Oh yeah, Shane, we Ancom, do you mind if we invite him to the main OA room, or?
Go ahead, I'll invite you right now. Fuck it.
Yeah,
I'm good with that. I can't do anything right now because I got to go pick up my kids from school. That's why we have the deadline. But
government schools.
Yeah, you'll be invited into the main Operation Anarchism room. So.
Okay.
Yep. And I got to rest because I got to go to work in about 3.5 hours.
All right.
Okay.
It's been fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.